Video lecture on public economics, chapter 6.3, fully funded versus pay-as-you-go pensions. Hello and welcome to our second lecture in this chapter 6 on pensions. Today we will compare the allocation in a pension system where the government takes income from the households, from the workers, invests it in the stock market and repays it to the worker when they retire. Usually this is done in form of an annuity, so that each month the Social Security Authority provides the retiree with a pension. And we will compare this with a pension system which is pay-as-you-go. This means we take the current workers, tax them or take away income from them and give it directly to the current retirees. And these two different systems have very different implications for the allocation, and it is the later that is the dominant one prevailing in Western democracies. One of the few countries which has a fully funded system is Chile in South America. So let's get into the slides of chapter 6.3. Please, for this reason, upload the slides from my homepage on chapter 6 pensions, and let's go to page 10, where chapter 6.3 fully funded versus pay-as-you-go public pension system starts. So as I mentioned, pay-as-you-go pensions take income from the current workers to finance pensions on the current retirees. Usually this income is taken as a levy, as a tax on your earnings, on your labor income. And in a fully funded system now, the government takes the contributions, which we use the denomination DT, the variable DT, and invest it in the capital market. It earns, of course, an interest on this investment, the real interest rate R, and it then redistributes the contribution plus interest, the principal plus interest to the retirees, usually in the form of annuities, but as we only consider two periods, the first period we are young and work, and the second period we are old and retire, these two are the same in our model. So let's write down the equations, the budget constraints in our fully funded pensions case. In this case, the household earns wage WT, and for the time being, let's assume we have inelastic labor supply, so we supply 1 unit of labor, which might be 40 working hours per week, something like this. And we earn the wage rate WT, so that the wage rate WT, the real wage, is also our real labor income, our earnings. And we spend our earnings on consumption when we are young, so this is the superscript 1 for young and 2 for old age, and the subscript T for the period. So C1T is consumption at young age in period T. And we have to pay Social Security contributions DT, so it's specified as a lump sum here. We will consider the sensitivity of this assumption also in the following. And the rest, we will save it in the form of ST here. We invest ST in the stock market, in the capital market, or in the bond market, as you like, and we get return RT plus 1 over the next period. So we will receive 1 plus RT plus 1 on our savings. The government will pay to us the proceeds from the investment in the capital market of our contributions to the pension system. So they invest DT in the capital market, will get 1 plus RT plus 1 as a return on their investment, on their savings, and they will return the full sum, the principal plus interest, to us at the end of period T plus 1. So let us look at the timing here. And let me get to the whiteboard for this. So you might remember this from chapter 3 on overlapping generations models. So this is the period T, we are young, and period T plus 1, we are retiring. When we are young, we work 1 unit over the whole period. So this is our labor supply 1, and we will receive WT, the wage rate, at the end of the period. So production also takes the whole period. At this time, we will also consume. We also pay our contributions DT, and we save ST. So over this period, we earn our wage WT. Over the next periods, the firms use our savings, in the form of capital, to produce the good, the consumption good, over the next period T plus 1. And we will earn the interest RT plus 1 over this period. And here at the beginning, at the end of the period T plus 1, we consume C2T plus 1. And we also receive our pension, which is DT times 1 plus RT plus 1. So this is the timing in the overlapping generations model. Now we make a couple of assumptions, and you can always discuss if this is realistic. One is that the government and the household receive the same rate of return in the capital market. Well, at first sight, you might argue, okay, if the government buys bonds or stocks, why should they receive a different rate of return than the households and the private agents? Well, we always look at the case that savings are positive. No? ST is positive here in equation 1b. Now, if the government increases pensions or contributions, DT, and the contributions reach a certain threshold level, we will see that ST becomes negative. Now, for negative savings, we become a debtor, and we observe in modern economies that, of course, the interest rate on debt is usually higher than interest rate on our positive savings here. So if we have a debt with our commercial bank, we usually pay higher interest rates. After all, banks have to make a profit in this world. So that's why we have higher debt rates than we can earn as interest on our positive savings. So this assumption here that government and the household receives the same rate of return in the capital market does not always apply, especially if we look at debtors. So keep this in mind, and we will discuss this in the following. Our lifetime utility here is additive function of instantaneous utility today, when we are young, in period T, and instantaneous utility in the next period, when we are old, in period T plus 1, when we have H2. And we assume the discount factor beta. And as we learned in chapter 3, this factor does not need to be below 1, as in the Ramsey model. We still have finite lifetime utility for beta larger than 1. And in this case, we do not have to make this assumption that beta is smaller than 1. And we learned in chapter 3 that from this we can derive the first order equation, our Euler equation. So equation 3 states that the marginal utility of consuming an extra unit today is the same as if we invest this unit in the capital market, get the interest rate 1 plus R over the period T plus 1, and consume it at the end of the period T plus 1, where we get marginal utility U prime, which we discount with the factor beta. So we must be indifferent between consume an extra unit today or saving it and consuming it in old age. Of course, these two marginal utilities must be the same, otherwise we could increase our lifetime utility if we shift our consumption to the period where we have larger marginal utility. And we can substitute the budget constraint for C1t and C2t plus 1 in this equation to derive equation 4a. So this is the description of our Euler equation 4a, and equation 4b is our capital market equilibrium. So the private savings ST plus the public savings DT are invested in the stock market and are equal to the capital stock at the beginning of period t plus 1. So if we go back to our whiteboard here, we assume that we invest ST and DT, we save at the end of period t plus 1 here at this time. And this point of time, of course, if we look at a continuous state in time, is the same as the beginning of period capital t plus 1 capital stock. So total savings, population size NT times ST plus DT must be equal to the capital stock at the beginning of period t plus 1. So end of period t savings, both private plus public, times the number of people who save, the young people, this is NT is the size of the young population, must be equal to the aggregate capital stock KT plus 1 at the beginning of period t plus 1, which we use to produce output over the whole period t plus 1. And if we divide this equation by the number of young people, NT, we get to the capital market equilibrium condition. So we get to equation 4b. And we can substitute 4b into our equation 4a, so we can eliminate ST plus DT from this equation, and we see that we have a first order equation, an Euler equation, that only depends on WT, RT plus 1, and KT plus 1. Remember from chapter 3 on the overlapping generation model that our wage rate is equal to the marginal product of labor, and we can write this as a function of the capital intensity KT, which is defined as K, uppercase K over labor L. So we can express the two factor prices, the wage rate WT and the interest rate RT, as functions of the capital stock per worker KT only. And now look at the equilibrium conditions of our model. Our equilibrium condition is the Euler equation, the bottom equation on slide 14, and the two prices, factor prices WT, RT. All these three equations are just equations of the capital stock. So our capital stock is independent of DT. We have an equation that just depends on the capital stock, and for initial capital stock K0, the initial capital stock of our economy is given, we can solve for all KT with the help of this equation, and DT is not a variable in this equation. So it doesn't matter how much we contribute to the pension system. So our allocations C1t, C2t, KT are the same in both economies. We conclude a fully funded social security system does not have any effect on total savings and capital accumulation, equilibrium factor prices, and lifetime of the utility of the household. So if the government, for example, wants a contribution from you for the pension system of let's say $100 or 100 euros or 100 yen or wherever you live, and invest it in the stock market, receives this return and pays it back to you, what you do is simply reduce your savings by $100, euros or yen or whatever, because you know this would result in the same allocation because the government will pay you the return from your savings when you retire. So the only difference that we observe between a fully funded system and a system without pensions, where DT is equal to 0, only arises if the interest rates of the government and the household were different. For example, if the household becomes a debtor because it wants to decrease savings, ST private savings below 0. Or if we had some kind of credit constraint, so that, for example, ST must be larger than 0, and if the contribution to the pension system, DT, increases above a threshold where we would like to decrease savings below 0, there might be a credit constraint which keeps us from decreasing our savings or accumulating debt. And in this case, of course, a fully funded system would have an impact on the allocation in our economy. So in this particular case, if DT rises above a threshold and ST cannot become negative, this would increase capital accumulation in our economy. But notice it would decrease the lifetime utility of the households because it is not optimal for them to do so. They would rather have lower savings, aggregate savings ST plus DT. So higher capital accumulation in this case only comes at the cost of lower lifetime utility of the households in case we had a credit constraint. Now you may wonder, well, is it always the case that fully funded public pension system does not have any effect on our allocation? Usually this pension contribution is not a lump sum component, but it's a tax on your labor income. And we know from chapter 5 on income taxation, if we have a tax on our labor income, we have a so-called tax wedge. And if the substitution effect is larger than the income effect, this means that we reduce our labor supply. So do we observe the same in the case of fully funded pension? In case we have a tax, a social security contribution tax, and contributions increase, shouldn't we decrease labor supply and the allocation would be different? And we consider this in the following model. So for this reason, assume that contributions are levied upon the individual wage income. Lifetime utility is, again, additive separable function in utility at young age and utility in old age, UY and UO. And the discount factor beta here is already taken care of by the function U0. So that's integral part that utility in old age is smaller or higher depending on the discount factor beta, smaller or larger than 1. This is just to simplify our analysis. So lifetime utility is additively separable in utility today and utility tomorrow, UY and UO. Now, different from equation 4, we now have a budget constraint 6a at young age that we spend our net income, net of social security contributions tau times WT on consumption C1 and savings ST. So our disposable income is now our wage income WT minus contributions to the pension system tau. When we are old, we get the return RT plus 1 on our savings, and also the government repays our contributions and an interest rate on top, interest rate being equal to RT plus 1. This is equation 6b, our consumption in old age, and our contributions DT, which are repaid in in the period t plus 1 with an interest rate are equal to tau times WT LT. That's our contributions. Now we can solve equation 6a for the savings ST and substitute it in, we can solve for the savings ST from equation 6b and substitute savings in equation 6a, and this results in the following intertemporal budget. Our net income plus our contribution to the pension system is equal to the discounted value of our lifetime consumption, so present consumption C1T plus discounted consumption in old age C2T plus 1. And noticing that our contributions are equal to dt, we get the lifetime budget equation 7. And as you can see, equation 7 does not depend on tau. So our wage income, our gross income WT/LT is equal to the expenditures on consumptions in period t and in period t plus 1. So if we maximize utility 5 subject to the budget constraint 7, we notice it does not depend on the amount of contributions on the contributions rate tau. And we get to the typical Euler equation here, equation 8a, and the first order condition with respect to labor 8b. And these two equations do not depend on tau either. So the first equation 8a is the Euler equation. Again, marginal utility from consuming 1 unit today, that's the left-hand side, must be equal to the increase in lifetime utility in period t plus 1, so 1 plus RT plus 1 times the marginal utility in period t plus 1. Oh, I'm sorry, the factor beta here should be dropped. Sorry for this. This is a typo. And in the second equation, we have that the marginal disutility from labor should be equal to the wage times the marginal utility from consumption. So in equation 8b, I compare if I have 1 extra unit of leisure, this increases my utility by minus the marginal disutility of labor. And compare this extra utility from leisure with the extra utility from working 1 extra hour. And if I work 1 extra hour, I earn the wage WT, and I can buy my utility goes up, of course, by WT times the marginal utility of consumption. So these are my two first order conditions, and they do not depend on the Social Security tax tau. Again, we have the first order conditions of profit maximization, so that the wage and the interest rate are equal to the marginal product of capital and labor, respectively, so do only depend on the capital intensity K. And we have the capital market equilibrium condition 9c, so the total savings ST plus DT is equal to the beginning of period T plus 1 capital stock, 1 plus N times KT plus 1 in per capita terms. And we can substitute savings and contributions in this equation here. So first part is our savings, our disposable private savings, our disposable income minus consumption. Second part is contributions. And we have the equation 9c, which relates next period capital stock to labor income and consumption. Total labor supply LT is equal to the number of workers N times the labor supply, the working hours, lowercase l. So all these equations, 9a, b, c, and our two Euler equations, 8a, 8b, do not depend on the Social Security tax tau. So when we, after substituting WT and RT plus 1 in the four equations 7, 8a, 8b, and 9c, we have four endogenous equations in the variables KT, KT plus 1, C1T, C2T plus 1, and LT. And when we have initial conditions, so the capital stock at the beginning of period 0, when we start this economy is given, then we can solve for all these endogenous variables, and none of it depends on tau because none of the equations, of the 4 equations, contains tau. So we have shown again that a social security contribution that is levied up proportional to wage income does not affect the equilibrium allocation in a fully funded public pension system either. So no matter whether the contribution is lump sum or levied on labor income, no effect on equilibrium allocation if, of course, if the government and the individual face the same interest rate, if there is no credit constraint, and therefore if the contribution DT does not surpass a threshold where private savings become negative and households may perhaps have to pay a higher interest rate. Okay, so what is the reason that some governments, like for example Chile, one of the few, invest the social security contributions in the stock market and run a fully funded system? In some part, this is also the case in Switzerland, where there are different kinds of social security contributions in the firm and another one that's pay as you go. Well, perhaps some of the assumptions that we make are not valid, so that perhaps the household saves too little, so we have not included uncertainty in the model yet. Perhaps the household is not really rational, should save more, but perhaps is a little bit, irrational, does not provide enough savings, does not accumulate enough savings to take care of his old age. And what happens if he does not save enough? Well, usually the government takes care of the people who are old and have not enough income and pay them some kind of assistance. Okay, and therefore, well, these countries may urge people to save enough. You can argue about this, and most social security systems in this world do not use fully funded systems. Okay, keeping this in mind, in the ideal case where people are rational and where we do not have credit constraint, so that we can incur debt without any surcharge on our interest rate, we do not need a fully funded system. Now let's compare this with the pay-as-you-go system. We will look at different forms of the pay-as-you-go system, but they all have the same idea. You take income from the young and transfer it to the current old generation. And when the young people get old, the next generation will pay for them. So in 10 years, I will retire, and hopefully my students will pay my pension. Well, to be exact, I'm not part of the public pay-as-you-go pension system. I'm a public employee, so I will get paid from a different institution. I will be paid from the federal government budget, but that's different. So let's assume I retire in 10 years and you will have to pay me nevertheless. So please go to work and pay for my pension. Now, we look at a pay-as-you-go pension and we will distinguish 4 cases. First one is we look at lump sum contributions. So pensions are independent of contributions. In the second case, we look at a contribution that's levied as a tax on wage income. But again, pensions are independent of contributions. Third, we will look at contributions-dependent pensions. So someone who contributes more to the pension system will also get a higher pension. And we look at the effects of growth. So let's just argue briefly why these four cases are interesting. Case one is just the benchmark case. And we want to compare it to the fully funded system if it makes a difference. For example, if we have a lump sum contributions, will we also reduce savings one by one? And we will see this will be different. So in our case, if we have a lump sum contribution or a pay-as-you-go pension system, savings will go down, the capital stock will decrease in our economy. We'll see that this effect is tremendous. It's very significant. Next, we want to see how big is the effect of a social security tax on wage income. And we will find, yes, it has distortionary effects. Our labor supply will go down. So in addition to the effect that it crowds out savings, it will also decrease our labor supply. Now, if we have contributions-dependent pension system, this disincentive effects on labor will be smaller, will be reduced, because we know we pay some kind of tax, but therefore also our income in the next period when we retire will go up. So this will reduce the disincentive effects, but in our model, it will not offset the disincentive effects of a tax on social security, on our labor income. And finally, we are interested in the effects of growth. Why is this important? Well, the return from the pay-as-you-go pension system is basically the population growth rate. So let's assume that I pay taxes, so social security taxes, so that the retirees right now get a pension. Now, let's say next period, in 10 years, I retire, and there will be double as many young people. So if double as many people pay contributions on their labor income, it means that there are more revenues for pensions, and the pensions will go up per capita. So the retirees are fewer, and therefore the pensions that is available for each retiree is higher. So the return of the pay-as-you-go pension system is driven by the population growth rate. And during these times where we have low population growth rates in the United States, but particularly in Germany, Italy, in continental Europe, this puts pressure on the pension system because the pay-as-you-go pension system has a low rate of return. Now, how can we increase this return? Well, if there's economic growth, this return will go up. So assume I earn, let's say, $3,000 per month right now, and I provide 10% to the retirees because there's a tax on my income which is spent on the retirees. We have $300 that goes to the retirees. When you will pay for my pension in 10 years, perhaps you do not earn $3,000, but you earn $5,000. And let's forget about inflation. This is also the real value in present purchasing power parity numbers. This means there will be much higher contribution to the pension system when I retire because of economic growth. And therefore, economic growth also increases the return of the pay-as-you-go system. So these two numbers, the population growth rate and the economic growth rate, are fundamental for the return on investment in the pension system. And I will, of course, compare this return with my private savings where I earn the real interest rates. And depending on which one is larger, the return, of course, from the public pay-as-you-go pension system might be smaller or larger than the return from the capital market. And we have to compare these two returns. And this is done in the fourth case where we look at pay-as-you-go pension system and economic growth. So let's go to the model of the pay-as-you-go pension system. We have the total number of young people NT. They each one contributes DT, the lump sum contribution. And as we take these contributions to finance the ones who are presently old and the period T, the present olds, have the number NT minus 1 because they were the young in period T minus 1. And they get a pension pen T. And of course, we assume a balanced budget of the Social Security Authority. So the contributions NT DT must be equal to the total pensions NT minus 1 pension T. So we can express the pension of each retiree pen T as a function of the contribution T dt of a young person. Its pension T is equal to 1 plus n times dt. And as you can see here, the return n shows up. That's the rate of return, the population growth rate. Equation 10. Our budget constraints are now familiar to you. So the young has budget constraint WT, his wage income, he works 1 unit of time, is spent on consumption C1, savings S, and contributions DT. And in old age, he receives receives a return on savings RT plus 1. And he receives a pension T plus 1, but he knows this pension does not depend on his decision. It depends on how much future generations will contribute. So his contribution DT right now is not related to his pension in period T plus 1. Its DT relates to the pension in T, but not to the pension in T plus 1. So if we solve for savings from equations 11b, we can substitute it in the budget constraint at young age, equation 11a, and we derive our intertemporal budget constraint 12. So on the left-hand side, we have total spending on consumption at young and old age, discounted to the present period T. And on the right-hand side, we have net income in period T, which is our wage, WT minus contributions DT, and discounted income in period T plus 1, which are our pensions. We can derive the first order Euler equations, so our lifetime utility is again provided by equation 2. And we get to the same Euler equation 3 as before. So our Euler equation u prime of C1t is equal to beta times 1 plus r times u prime of C2t. This is our Euler equation 13, and we can substitute C1t from equation 11a and C2t plus 1 from equation 11b to derive equation 14. 14 is our Euler condition, and this Euler condition I will show to you on the blackboard. Okay, so hope you can see, or rather the whiteboard here. Here we have marginal utility at young age in period T equal to marginal utility in period T plus 1 from consumption C2T plus 1, discounted by factor beta. And because if we invest 1 unit in period T, we earn the return 1 plus RT plus 1 in period T plus 1. This is our Euler condition. So no matter where we consume 1 unit of income, whether we consume it today or tomorrow, it must have the same marginal effect on lifetime utility. We should be indifferent when we consume this unit. If not, for example, if marginal utility is higher tomorrow, what we will do is we reduce our consumption here by 1 unit, invested in the capital market, earn return 1 plus RT plus 1. This gives us marginal utility u prime next period discounted by factor beta. And if this is large, of course, our lifetime utility will go up. Now what we do next is we use the total differential. We will formulate the total differential, and we have variables WT, wage WT, savings ST, contributions DT, interest rate RT plus 1, and DT plus 1. We will consider the case that the government runs balanced, constant contribution policy, so constant policy from the government side, and we will formulate the total differential. So, for example, for the left side, we find that U prime prime of C1t times dWt minus dSt minus dt. That's the marginal utility of the left-hand side. And we also form the marginal utility of the right-hand side. So this is beta times U prime prime of C2t plus 1 times dRt plus 1. That's the first factor here, RT plus 1, the total differential, plus beta times 1 plus RT plus 1, U prime prime of C2t plus 1 times dRt plus 1 times ST plus 1 plus RT plus 1 dSt plus 1 plus N ddt plus 1. So this is the total differential. And when we set dWt to 0, so analyze the case for constant exogenous wage and constant interest rate here, we can form the partial derivative solve for delta st delta dt. So setting these differentials equal to 0, dWt and dRt plus 1, solving for dSt and dt, and noticing that when we set this to 0, we do not have the total differential anymore, but the partial differential, and we just have to use algebra to solve this equation. And this solution here is presented to you on the slide 25. It's the equation, the second equation, partial st divided by partial dt, so the derivative of savings with respect to dt is equal to the fraction on the right-hand side. And because the second derivative of the instantaneous utility function u with respect to consumption is negative, we have a decreasing marginal utility from consumption. This equation has a definite sign and it's negative. So if our contributions to the pension system go up, our savings decline. This is proven for constant wages and constant real interest rates. Now we also have to look at the general equilibrium now, and now we consider the effects that, of course, wages and interest rates adjust if our savings decision is affected. Now our equilibrium condition in the pay-as-you-go pension system is given by the first equation on slide 26. So it's 1 plus n times kt plus 1 is equal to savings. So notice that now with the pay-as-you-go pension system, it's no longer, the right-hand side is no longer S plus D, but it's simply S, because D is not saved, it's not invested in the capital market by the government, but it's transferred to the present retirees who consume it. So therefore, it's a crucial difference here that our capital market equilibrium is just 1 plus n times k is equal to s and not equal to s plus d. Now if we again differentiate this whole equation, take the total derivative and solve for dkt plus 1 over ddt, we find that it's equal to the partial derivative of savings with respect to contributions dt divided by 1 plus n minus SR f double prime kt plus 1. So SR is the partial derivative of savings with respect to the interest rate, and f double prime, that's the second derivative of the production function with respect to the capital stock. We know that f double prime is smaller than 0, and the reaction of savings on a change on the interest rate, the partial derivative, well, can be positive or negative depending on the substitution or income effect. But if you remember our argument from chapter 3, where we looked at the overlapping generations model, there we found that if we have a stable steady state, the fraction, the denominator 1 plus n minus SR f double prime is larger than 0. So what we have in this case here is we have a negative effect of an increase in the contributions dt on the capital stock kt plus 1. So we have shown that higher contributions to a pay-as-you-go pension system reduce capital accumulation anonymously if we have a stable equilibrium, steady state, a stable economy, or even just the denominator 1 plus n minus SR times f double prime must be larger than 0. And this is usually the case. Okay, so we have shown analytically here, pay-as-you-go pension system, higher pensions, more generous system, reduce the capital stock. So if we go back to our empirical values and look at the gross pension replacement rates, which describes pensions relative to earnings, we notice that countries like Italy, Denmark, or the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Portugal, all those with generous pension system, and they are all pay-as-you-go, they should have lower aggregate savings and lower capital stock, according to our results here in our simple two-period overlapping generation model. And what we do next is, well, we look at a numerical example, two-period example, to get an idea about the magnitude, about the quantitative effect of such a distortion that stems from the pay-as-you-go pension system, higher contributions, lower savings. And we look at the case where, at a very easy case here, we apply log utility and a typical disutility from labor, where Nu1 describes the Frisch labor supply elasticity, if you remember from chapter 5, for example. And we consider an economy where the alpha is equal to 36%. So we use Cobb-Douglas production function. Capital share is 36%. Labor is 64%. And we look at a social security contribution, D, either 0 or 30% of gross income. Now, 30% of gross income translate into something like 20% of GDP. Huh? So gross income, the labor share is 64%. And if you multiply it by 0.3, it's approximately 20% of GDP. And when we look at our empirical values, sorry for this, social pension spending in the OECD in 2012 as percent of GDP, we notice, well, Greece and Italy are close to this value. So we analyze the case where pension spending are around 20%, and we have countries like Italy and Greece where it's already close to this number and will get there very soon because of the demographic transition. So you may think of our numerical example, well, this is the case for Greece and Italy that we consider. In the United States, we should set, if we have the United States in mind, we should set tau equal to a smaller value, let's say 15% or 10%. This would be more realistic. And then we compute the effects of this pension system, this pay-as-you-go pension system on our savings. Remember, in the fully funded system, there would be no effect. In the pay-as-you-go pension system, we observe that the capital stock falls by 2/3. Labor, if we use a lump sum component, there's no effect. If we look at elastic labor supply and have the case that it's a levy, a social security tax on wage income, labor drops by 2%. And if it's contributions defined so that we know, okay, a higher labor supply also increases our pensions in the future, only the disincentive effect of a tax on labor income only results in a decrease of 1% of labor supply. And we can also compute the effect on labor output, and we find, we find that the decrease in output is 29%. So if we impose social security taxes and spend as much on pensions as we do in Greece or Italy, the capital stock decreases by 62%, output decreases by 29%, and we can also compute the welfare change and express it in units of consumption, which amounts to 38% of consumption. So the utility of the Italian and the Greek, just because of the pension system, is 38% less. They produce 29% less output, and the capital stock is reduced by 62%. Okay, this is the result of the two-period model, and I would also like already point out to you that this is an upper bound of what we calculate. So if we take a more accurate description of the demography in these countries, use a large-scale overlapping generations model, perhaps with 80 periods, where periods correspond to years, then these numbers are lower. But they already give you an idea how dramatic the effects of a public pension system that is organized as pay-as-you-go will inflict on our economy and on our well-being. And in the next video, you will learn how to compute this numerical example. So let me thank you for your attention and hope you enjoyed this tutorial. We have shown fully funded pension system has no effects under certain conditions. If we have perfect capital markets, interest rates are the same for government and households, no credit market constraints. And if we go to a public pension pay-as-you-go system, as we observe it basically throughout the world, with very, very few exceptions, we find there are huge effects on capital accumulation, and capital stock will reduce not by 1, by 2, but by many dozens percentage points from the case without a social security. And we will wonder in the end, why do we have social security at all if we show such tremendous negative effects on equilibrium allocation? And this will be the material for the rest of this chapter.